The night Riley spoke those words, she had no idea she was standing at the edge of a cliff she couldn't see yet. It was late November in Chicago, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and doesn't leave until April. The diner where she worked sat tucked between a laundromat and a closed pawn shop on the south side, the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt and the regulars knew each other's orders by heart. Riley had been pulling double shifts for 3 months straight, breakfast to close, 6 days a week, because her mother's medical bills didn't care that she was 24 and exhausted down to her marrow. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering the way they always did around midnight. Her feet ached in shoes held together with duct tape. Her tips that night had been decent, enough to cover groceries, maybe part of the electric bill. Not enough for the hospital payment due next week. Never enough for that. She was wiping down the counter when he walked in. The bell above the door chimed, but the sound felt different somehow. Heavier, like the air itself changed when he crossed the threshold. He wore a black coat that probably cost more than her car, his dark hair pushed back from a face that looked carved from something harder than flesh. 2 men followed him, silent and watchful, positioning themselves near the door like sentries. Riley had lived in Chicago long enough to recognize money when she saw it. Real money, the kind that didn't come from good decisions. He sat at the counter, his movements precise and unhurried. The diner's usual noise, the hiss of the grill, the murmur of the television mounted in the corner, seemed to quiet around him. Riley grabbed a menu and approached, exhaustion making her bolder than usual. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. "Coffee?" she asked. He nodded once. His eyes were dark, unreadable, the color of Chicago winters. She poured, her hand steady despite the weight of his attention. That's when she saw it, just a glimpse as his cuff shifted when he reached for the sugar. A tattoo on his inner wrist, intricate and unmistakable. A compass rose intertwined with thorns, rendered in black ink so precise it looked like calligraphy. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours." The silence that followed felt like falling. His hand stopped mid-E. The 2 men by the door straightened, their attention sharpening to a point. And he looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since he'd walked in. "What did you say?" His voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath it ran something else. Something that made Riley's pulse kick hard against her ribs. She shouldn't have said anything. She knew that now. But she was tired, bone-tired, the kind of tired that came from working yourself raw trying to keep someone you love alive, and the words were already out there, hanging in the air between them like smoke. "The tattoo on your wrist," she said, pointing with the coffee pot still in her hand. "My mom has the same one. Exact same design. I've seen it my whole life." He set the sugar down slowly, deliberately. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Riley thought he might stand up and walk out. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Where's your mother now?" "St. Catherine's Hospital," Riley said. "She's been there 2 months. Kidney failure." Something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe, or calculation. Riley couldn't tell. "What's her name?" "Catherine Moore." Riley's throat felt tight. "Why? Do you know her?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a wallet, thick with bills. He peeled off 500s and set them on the counter between them. "For the coffee," he said. "So, it's $2. Keep it. Before we go on, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below." He stood, buttoning his coat with the same careful precision he'd used for everything else. The 2 men by the door moved immediately, flanking him. "What room?" he asked. "What?" "At St. Catherine's. What room is she in?" Riley's heart hammered. Every instinct told her not to answer. But $500 sat on the counter, and her mother's hospital bill was $12,000 and climbing, and she was so tired of being afraid all the time. "Room 347, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned toward the door. The men followed like shadows. "Wait," Riley called after him. "Who are you?" He paused at the threshold, his hand on the door. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he glanced back over his shoulder, his face half in shadow. Someone who knew her a long time ago. The door closed behind him. The bell chimed. And Riley stood there with $500 in cash and a feeling in her gut like she'd just set something irreversible into motion. She closed the diner an hour later, her hand shaking as she locked the door. The money sat folded in her apron pocket, crisp and impossible. She walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, the November wind cutting through her coat, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Her mother never talked about her past. Riley knew the basics. She'd grown up in New York, moved to Chicago when Riley was a baby, worked as a nurse until the sickness made it impossible. But there were gaps. Years of silence. Questions her mother deflected with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. And that tattoo. Riley had asked about it once when she was 12, tracing the compass rose with her finger while her mother sat at their kitchen table paying bills. "It's from before," her mother had said. "Before you. Before this life." Before what? Before I got smart enough to leave. That was all she'd ever said about it. The bus rumbled through the empty streets, past closed storefronts and lit apartment windows where other people lived other lives. Riley pressed her forehead against the cold glass and watched Chicago blur past, city lights smearing in the darkness like watercolors. At home, a studio apartment in a building where the heat barely worked, she lay awake until dawn, staring at the water stain on the ceiling and turning that moment over and over in her mind. The way he'd stopped when she mentioned the tattoo. The way he'd said her mother's name like it hurt. The money he'd left without expecting change. Someone who knew her a long time ago. Riley didn't sleep. When morning came gray and cold through her single window, she called the hospital. "St. Catherine's, how may I direct your call?" "Room 347, please. Catherine Moore." The line clicked, rang twice. Her mother's voice came through, weak but familiar. "Hello." "Mom, it's me." "Riley. Honey, it's 6 in the morning." "I know. Riley stopped, unsure how to ask what she needed to ask. "Mom, do you know anyone named?" She realized she didn't even know his name. "Do you know anyone from New York? Someone you haven't seen in a long time?" The silence on the other end stretched too long. "Mom, why are you asking me this?" "A man came into the diner last night. He had a tattoo like yours. The compass rose. He asked about you." Another long silence. Then, quietly, "What did you tell him?" "That you were sick. That you were at St. Catherine's." Riley's chest tightened. "Mom, who is he?" "Riley, listen to me very carefully." Her mother's voice had changed, sharpened with an urgency Riley had never heard before. "If he comes to see me, you stay away from the hospital. Do you understand? You don't come here." "What? Mom, I don't." "Promise me." "I can't promise that. You're sick. I'm not going to." "Riley." Her mother's voice broke. "Please, just this once. Trust me. Stay away." The line went dead. Riley stood in her kitchen holding her phone, the morning light cold and gray around her, and felt the ground beneath her feet start to shift. Riley went to the hospital anyway. She told herself it was because her mother was sick, because 2 months of watching someone you love waste away doesn't stop just because they ask you to stay home. But the truth sat heavier in her chest. She needed to see who this man was. Needed to understand why a stranger's tattoo could put that kind of fear in her mother's voice. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Riley knew every corner of it by now. The cafeteria where coffee cost $4, the waiting room where families slept in plastic chairs, the elevators that took forever to come. She signed in at the third-floor nurse's station and walked down the corridor toward room 347, her pulse loud in her ears. The door was closed. Through the narrow window, she could see her mother sitting up in bed, her thin frame propped by pillows, her face turned toward someone Riley couldn't see. A man's voice, low and steady, filtered through the door. Not angry, not threatening, just There. Riley's hand hovered over the handle. She shouldn't interrupt. Her mother had been clear. But fear and curiosity were tangled up so tight in her chest she couldn't tell them apart anymore. She pushed the door open. He sat in the chair beside the bed, still wearing that expensive coat, his posture relaxed but his attention total. Her mother looked small next to him, fragile in a way that made Riley's throat tighten. But her eyes were sharp, awake in a way they hadn't been in weeks. They both turned when Riley entered. "I told you not to come," her mother said softly. "I know." Riley stayed by the door, her hand still on the handle. "I came anyway." The man stood. Up close. He was taller than she'd realized, his presence filling the small room like weather. He looked at Riley the way he'd looked at her in the diner, with an intensity that made her feel seen and exposed all at once. "This is my daughter," her mother said. "Riley." "I know." His voice carried the faint trace of an accent Riley couldn't place, softened by years but still there underneath. "We met last night." Riley looked between them. "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" Her mother's hand trembled where it lay on the white hospital blanket. The man, still nameless to Riley, moved back to the chair but didn't sit. Instead, he stood beside the bed like a guard, like someone used to standing between the world and whatever he'd decided to protect. "Your mother and I knew each other in New York," he said. "A long time ago." "How long?" 25 years. "Before you. Before this life." Riley's stomach dropped. "And the tattoo?" Her mother closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. "We both got them when we were young and stupid. When we thought we were invincible. Thought we could outrun our choices," the man added quietly. The machines monitoring her mother's vitals beeped softly in the silence that followed. Outside the window, Chicago sprawled under a gray December sky, indifferent and immense. "Mom," Riley said carefully. "Who is he?" Her mother looked at the man. Something passed between them, permission, maybe, or resignation. "His name is Grayson Hale," her mother said. "And 25 years ago, I was supposed to marry him." The floor tilted under Riley's feet. "What?" "It was arranged," her mother continued, her voice steady now, like she'd made peace with telling this story, "by his family and mine. Old New York money, the kind of arrangements people don't make anymore. I was 19. He was 23. We barely knew each other." Grayson's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "And then," Riley whispered, "then I found out I was pregnant." Her mother's eyes found Riley's. "With you." The beeping of the machines seemed very loud. "Your father, your real father, was someone I loved, someone I chose. But he wasn't part of that world, and there was no place for us in it." Her mother's voice cracked. "So I ran. Disappeared in the middle of the night with nothing but a bag and a bus ticket to Chicago. Changed my name. Started over." Riley couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 24 years of her life rearranging themselves in her mind like a puzzle she'd been staring at wrong the whole time. And him. She looked at Grayson. "What did you do?" "I looked for her." His voice was quiet. "For 5 years, I looked. Then I stopped." "Why?" "Because she didn't want to be found." He met Catherine's eyes, and I convinced myself that meant she was happy. Catherine's hand reached out, trembling, and touched his wrist where the compass rose disappeared under his cuff. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for running, for never explaining, for all of it." "Don't." He covered her hand with his. "You did what you had to do." Riley watched them, these two people whose lives had collided with hers in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her mother looked smaller than Riley had ever seen her, worn down by sickness and secrets. And Grayson, this man who'd walked into a South Side diner by chance or fate, looked at Catherine like he was seeing a ghost he'd spent decades trying to forget. "Why now?" Riley asked. "Why show up after all these years?" Grayson's attention shifted to her. "I didn't know she was here." Didn't know she was sick. I was in Chicago for business. Stopped at that diner because my driver needed gas and I needed coffee. He paused. When you mentioned the tattoo, I knew. Even before you said her name, I knew. And the money? A down payment. On what? On making sure she doesn't die because she can't afford treatment. Riley's breath caught. What are you talking about? Her mother tried to sit up straighter, wincing. Riley, I can't accept. The hospital bill is $12,000, Grayson said, cutting her off gently but firmly. The transplant she needs, if they find a match, will cost 10 times that. Plus recovery, medication, follow-up care. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. I'm transferring $200,000 to the hospital's billing department. Effective immediately. No. Catherine's voice was sharp despite her weakness. Absolutely not. It's already done. Grayson, I left that world for a reason. I don't want your money. I don't want. What you want, he said quietly, is irrelevant when it comes to staying alive. The room fell silent except for the machines and the distant sound of the hospital paging someone over the intercom. Riley looked at this man who'd appeared out of her mother's past like something from a dream, offering miracles with the same casualness other people offered directions. Part of her wanted to refuse on principle, to protect whatever pride her mother had left. But the larger part, the part that had watched her mother fade for 2 months, that had worked herself to exhaustion trying to pay bills that never stopped coming, that part wanted to fall to her knees and weep with relief. If this story has already found a place in your heart, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more stories that stay long after they end. Why? Riley asked. Why would you do this for someone who ran away from you? Grayson looked at Catherine, and in his eyes Riley saw something that made her understand, finally, what her mother had been running from all those years ago. Not cruelty, not danger, love, the kind that doesn't die just because someone disappears, the kind that waits in the dark for 25 years, patient and unforgiving, until chance or fate brings it back into the light. Because some debts don't expire, he said simply, and some people are worth more than money can measure. Her mother closed her eyes, tears sliding down her thin cheeks. Riley stood by the door, watching them, and felt her life splitting into before and after. Before she knew her mother had been someone else entirely. Before a stranger walked into a diner and changed everything. Before she understood that the past never really stays buried, no matter how deep you dig. There's a condition, Grayson said, his voice still quiet but carrying weight that made Riley's pulse quicken. Of course there is, Catherine whispered. He turned to Riley. You come work for me. What? I own several businesses in Chicago. Restaurants, a hotel, other interests. You're working yourself to death in that diner for minimum wage and tips that don't cover rent. Come work for me instead. Better hours, better pay. Enough that you can actually live while your mother recovers. Riley's hands clenched at her sides. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's employment. I need people I can trust. And you just proved you're brave enough to speak up when something doesn't make sense. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. That's rarer than you'd think in my world. What world is that exactly? The one your mother ran from. He didn't look away. But I'm not asking you to join it. Just to work a legitimate job for legitimate pay while she gets better. Riley looked at her mother, who had opened her eyes and was watching her with an expression Riley couldn't read. Mom, it's your choice, honey. It was always supposed to be your choice. But they both knew it wasn't really a choice. Not with medical bills like mountains and a mother dying by degrees in a hospital bed. Not with exhaustion ground so deep into Riley's bones she sometimes forgot what it felt like to sleep through the night. Okay, Riley heard herself say. I'll do it. Grayson nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. Good. Someone will contact you tomorrow with details. He reached into his coat and pulled out a business card, handing it to Riley. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. Just a name and a phone number. If you need anything at all, you call that number. Riley took the card, her fingers numb. Why are you really doing this? He looked at Catherine again, and the weight of their shared history hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Because I couldn't save her then, he said softly. Maybe I can now. He left the same way he'd arrived, quietly. His presence felt long after he was gone. Riley sank into the chair he'd vacated, still warm from his body. Her mother reached for her hand. I'm sorry, Catherine whispered, for all the secrets, for dragging you into this. You didn't drag me anyway. Riley squeezed her mother's hand gently. I walked in on my own. That man is dangerous, Riley. Not in the way you think, maybe, but dangerous all the same. He comes from a world where everything has a price and everyone owes someone something. He just paid your hospital bill. No. Her mother's grip tightened. He just bought himself back into our lives. The call came at 8 the next morning. Riley had made it home from the hospital around midnight, her mind spinning too fast for sleep. She'd sat at her kitchen table staring at Grayson's business card until the words blurred, then finally collapsed into bed fully clothed. When her phone rang, she grabbed it without looking at the screen. Hello. Miss Moore. A woman's voice, professional and crisp. My name is Teresa. I work for Mr. Hale. He asked me to contact you regarding your employment. Riley sat up, her heart kicking. Right. Okay. Can you meet today? 2 o'clock at the Continental, downtown. Mr. Hale would like to discuss the position and handle paperwork. The Continental. Riley knew the name. Everyone in Chicago did. It was the kind of hotel where senators stayed, where movie stars hid from paparazzi, where a single night cost more than Riley made in a month. Yes, the penthouse level. Security will be expecting you. The line went dead before Riley could respond. She stood in her apartment as morning light crept through the window, illuminating the shabby furniture and peeling paint she'd stopped seeing years ago. The Continental. The penthouse level. Security will be expecting you. What the hell had she agreed to? She called the diner and quit over voicemail, her voice shaking. 5 years she'd worked there, and it ended with a 30-second message to a manager who probably wouldn't even remember her name by next week. Then she stood under a lukewarm shower until the water ran cold, trying to wash away the feeling that she was stepping off a ledge into empty air. At 1:30, she took the train downtown. The Continental rose 70 stories above Michigan Avenue, all glass and steel and money. Riley walked through revolving doors into a lobby that looked like something from a magazine. Marble floors so polished they reflected the chandeliers overhead, furniture that probably cost more than her car, people in suits that fit like they were born wearing them. She approached the desk in her cleanest jeans and a sweater she'd bought at Target 3 years ago, feeling like a fraud. I'm here to see Mr. Hale. Penthouse level. The woman behind the desk didn't blink. Name. Riley Moore. She typed something, then nodded toward the elevators. Third bank, far elevator. It'll take you directly up. The elevator was lined with mirrors and dark wood, smooth jazz playing from hidden speakers. Riley watched herself rise through the heart of the building, her reflection multiplying into infinity. She looked young, scared, out of place. She looked exactly like what she was, a South Side waitress playing dress-up in a world she didn't understand. The elevator opened into a private foyer. A woman in her 40s stood waiting, perfectly tailored suit, hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but probably took an hour. The woman from the phone. Miss Moore, I'm Teresa. This way, please. She followed Teresa through double doors into a space that made Riley's breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked all of Chicago, the lake stretching gray and endless to the east, the city sprawling in every direction like a living thing. The furniture was minimal but clearly expensive, the kind of clean lines and muted colors that whispered money. Grayson stood by the windows, hands in his pockets, watching the city below. He turned when they entered. Riley, thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? Always. He gestured to a table near the windows where papers were laid out in neat stacks. Have a seat. Teresa poured coffee from a carafe, set out cream and sugar, then retreated to the far side of the room where she began working on a laptop. Riley sat, accepting the coffee more for something to do with her hands than any real desire to drink it. Grayson sat across from her. Up close, in daylight, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. He looked like someone who'd lived hard and lived well, who'd made choices and paid for them and kept moving forward anyway. Let's be clear about what this is, he said without preamble. I own a restaurant called Meridian. High-end, exclusive clientele. I need someone to manage the front of house, seating, reservations, customer relations. The pay is $6,000 a month, plus health insurance and a housing stipend. Riley nearly choked on her coffee. $6,000. That's more than double what you were making at the diner, and the hours are reasonable. 5 nights a week, 6 to midnight. Why? She set the cup down before she could drop it. Why me? I've never worked anywhere like that. I don't know anything about fine dining or exclusive clientele or... You're smart. You notice things. And you don't scare easily. He leaned back in his chair. Those qualities are more valuable than experience. Riley looked at the papers spread across the table, employment contracts, tax forms, direct deposit information. Official. Legal. Real. What's the catch? No catch. You work, you get paid, you show up on time, treat the customers well, and don't ask questions about things that aren't your business. And what isn't my business? His eyes met hers. Anything that happens after midnight. The words settled between them like a stone dropped in still water. You're asking me to look the other way. I'm asking you to do a job and nothing more. He leaned forward. Riley, I'm not a saint. The world I come from, the world your mother ran from, it's complicated. But this position is legitimate. The restaurant is legal, profitable, and well regarded. You won't be involved in anything illegal, and you won't be put in danger. Then why does it feel like I'm making a deal with the devil? He smiled, but there was no humor in it. Because that's what people say about men like me. And maybe they're right. But the devil pays well, and your mother needs medicine that costs more than prayers. Riley hated that he was right. Hated that she'd been backed into a corner where pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Hated that part of her was grateful, desperately grateful, for this lifeline she didn't deserve. If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. When do I start? Tomorrow night. Teresa will have everything ready. Uniforms, training schedule, your apartment. Riley's head snapped up. My what? The housing stipend I mentioned. There's a unit in a building I own, 10 minutes from here. 2-bedroom, furnished. Rent-free as long as you're employed. That's not a stipend, that's part of your compensation package. His tone left no room for argument. You were living in a studio with broken heat, working 70 hours a week just to stay afloat. Consider this an improvement. Riley wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his charity, his pity, his blood money or whatever this was. But the thought of a place with heat that worked, with a door that locked properly, with enough space that she could breathe, it made something in her chest crack open. Okay, she whispered. Good. He stood, buttoning his jacket with the same precise movements she'd noticed in the diner. Teresa will handle the details. If you need anything, you have my number. Why are you doing this? Riley asked suddenly. And don't tell me it's about old debts or guilt or whatever. There's more to it. Grayson paused, his hand on the back of his chair. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked at her with eyes that had seen things she couldn't imagine, lived through years she'd never understand. "Your mother saved my life once," he said quietly. "Not from a bullet or a knife. From something worse, from becoming the kind of man who has nothing left worth saving." He pulled the chair back under the table, precise and careful. "She gave up everything to protect you from the life she was born into. The least I can do is make sure that sacrifice wasn't in vain." He walked toward the elevator, Teresa following with her laptop and her perfect hair. At the door, he stopped. "One more thing. Your mother doesn't need to know the details of where you work or what I own. As far as she's concerned, you're managing a restaurant. Nothing more. You want me to lie to her?" "I want to give her peace of mind while she recovers. There's a difference." The elevator doors closed behind him, and Riley was alone in the penthouse with its view of the city and its promises that felt like chains. She signed the papers. Teresa gave her keys to an apartment she hadn't seen yet, a uniform still in dry cleaning plastic, and a schedule that started tomorrow at 6 p.m. Then Riley took the elevator back down through the heart of the building, her reflection multiplying in the mirrors, and wondered if her mother had felt like this 25 years ago, like she was stepping into a current too strong to swim against. The apartment was in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood Riley had only ever seen from the outside. The building had a doorman who knew her name before she introduced herself, elevators that worked, and hallways that smelled like fresh paint instead of mildew and regret. Unit 804 was on the 8th floor, facing east toward the lake. Riley stood in the doorway and stared. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, furniture that looked new and expensive but somehow comfortable. A kitchen with appliances that probably cost more than her entire year's salary at the diner. Windows that actually opened. Heat that worked. She walked through the space in a daze, touching things to make sure they were real. The smooth countertops, the soft couch, the bed with sheets that had thread counts she'd only heard about. In the bathroom, there were towels stacked on chrome shelves, and the shower had water pressure that could strip paint. Riley sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not from happiness exactly, not from fear, from the overwhelming weight of having the ground beneath her feet shift so completely in 24 hours that she couldn't tell anymore which way was up. She called her mother. "How are you feeling?" "Better." Catherine's voice did sound stronger. "The doctors say the treatment is working. Whatever Grayson did, it's helping." "Good. That's good. How was your meeting?" Riley looked around the apartment, this beautiful cage she'd walked into willingly. "I start work tomorrow, managing a restaurant downtown. The pay is good." "Riley." "I know, Mom. I know what you're going to say, but I made my choice." A long silence on the other end. Then, softly, "Just be careful. Men like Grayson, they don't give without expecting something back eventually." "What did he expect from you?" "Everything." Her mother's voice cracked. "He expected everything, and I couldn't give it to him." After they hung up, Riley sat in her new apartment and watched the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep blue. Somewhere below, people were living their normal lives, going to work, going home, unaware that above them a girl from the South Side was sitting in a penthouse apartment wondering what price she'd agreed to pay. Tomorrow she'd start work. Tomorrow she'd step into Grayson Hale's world for real. Tomorrow she'd learn what it meant to owe someone like him. Tonight, she let herself have this. One night in a place that felt like safety, even if that safety was an illusion. Even if she already knew, somewhere deep in her bones, that nothing in Grayson Hale's world was ever truly free. The restaurant sat on the Gold Coast, tucked between buildings that housed law firms and investment banks. No sign marked the entrance, just a black door with a brass number and a small camera above the frame. Riley stood outside at 5:30 p.m., her new uniform crisp under her coat, and felt her courage waver. Teresa had sent detailed instructions. Enter through the back. Ask for Raymond. He'll handle your training. Simple. Direct. But standing here now, watching well-dressed people slip through that unmarked door like they were entering a secret, Riley felt the weight of what she'd agreed to settle over her shoulders like snow. She went around back. The service entrance led to a kitchen already humming with prep work, chefs moving with balletic precision, the smell of herbs and searing meat, and something sweet she couldn't identify. A man in his 60s, gray hair and kind eyes, looked up from a clipboard. "You must be Riley." "Raymond." "That's me. Come on, I'll show you around before Savor starts." He led her through the kitchen into the dining room, and Riley stopped breathing for a second. The space was beautiful in an understated way. Dark wood, low lighting, tables spaced far enough apart that conversations stayed private. The kind of place where power brokers made deals and secrets got traded like currency. "We seat 40 per night, maximum," Raymond explained. "Reservations only, months in advance. Your job is to make sure everyone feels like they are the only person in the room." "That's it. That's everything." He smiled. "This isn't about food. Not really. It's about making people feel seen. Important. Safe. Safe." The word echoed strangely in Riley's mind. "What about after midnight?" Raymond's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. "We close at midnight. What happens after that isn't your concern." There it was again. The line in the sand. The invisible boundary between the job she'd been hired for and whatever else Grayson Hale did in the dark. "Now," Raymond continued, pulling out a leather-bound book, "let's go over the reservation system." The next 4 hours passed in a blur of names and preferences and allergies and seating politics Riley had never imagined. Who couldn't sit near whom? Which tables were reserved for specific people regardless of availability? The regular who only drank vodka from a specific distillery. The couple who came every Tuesday and never spoke to each other. At 6 p.m., the first guests arrived. Riley stood by the host stand in her black dress and low heels, her hair pulled back, her smile practiced but genuine. She greeted them by name, Mr. Chen and his wife, celebrating their anniversary, and led them to table 7, pulling out Mrs. Chen's chair, mentioning that the chef had prepared something special for the occasion. They smiled at her, really smiled, like she mattered. The night unfolded with surprising smoothness. Riley found her rhythm, greeting guests, managing tables, handling complaints with grace she didn't know she possessed. Raymond watched from the corner, nodding approval. At 9:30, Grayson walked in. He wasn't on the reservation list. Didn't need to be. The staff straightened instinctively, their movements sharper, more careful. He caught Riley's eye and nodded once, then took a table in the back corner that had somehow stayed empty all night despite the waiting list. He ate alone, reading something on his phone, but his presence changed the room's energy. Other guests noticed him, some with recognition, others with curiosity, but no one approached. Riley brought water without being asked. "Everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Hale." "Perfect." He set his phone down. "You're doing well." "Thanks." "Mean it." His eyes held hers. "You belong here." The words shouldn't have meant anything, but standing there under his attention, feeling competent for the first time in months, Riley felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Pride. Belonging. The sense that maybe she wasn't just pretending after all. She turned away before he could see it on her face. Midnight came. The last guests departed. Raymond dismissed the staff, and Riley gathered her things, exhausted but satisfied. She was heading toward the back when she noticed Grayson still at his table. "You don't have to stay," he said. "I was just leaving." "Walk with me." It wasn't really a question. Riley set down her coat and followed him through the now empty restaurant to a door she hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a wine rack. "Where are we going?" "You wanted to know what happens after midnight." He pushed the door open. "Now you'll see. If your heart's racing too, take a breath. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more unforgettable love stories." The door led to stairs going down. Riley's pulse kicked hard. "I don't think. You're safe with me." He looked back at her. "Always." Something in his voice made her believe him. She followed him down into darkness that gradually brightened as they descended. At the bottom, another door. Grayson pressed his palm to a scanner, and it swung open. The space beyond looked like an office suite. Elegant, professional, nothing sinister about it. Desks with computers, filing cabinets, a conference table, and people. 3 men and 2 women, all well-dressed, all working despite the late hour. This is where the real business happens, Grayson said quietly. We run security consultations, risk assessment, private investigations. All legal, all above board. Riley looked around. Why hide it? Because the people who need these services value discretion above everything else. He gestured to a glass-walled office at the far end. Come on. Inside, he poured 2 glasses of water from a carafe and handed her one. Through the glass, Riley could see the staff working, typing, talking on phones, reviewing documents. Your mother told me you were smart, Grayson said, settling into the chair behind his desk, that you always asked the right questions. She talked about me. In the hospital. She's proud of you. He sipped his water, said you worked 3 jobs once to keep her in treatment, that you never complained. Riley's throat tightened. She would have done the same. Yes, she would have. He set the glass down. That's why I need you to understand something. This world, my world, it's built on secrets and leverage and knowing things other people don't. But I don't deal in drugs or trafficking or any of the worst things people assume. I deal in information, protection, solutions for people who can't go to the police. Why not? Because sometimes the law can't help. Sometimes you need something else. Riley thought about that, about the people who'd come through the restaurant tonight, powerful and polished, but with something haunted in their eyes. About the kind of problems that couldn't be solved with lawyers and paperwork. You're telling me this why? Because I don't want you to be afraid of me. His voice was soft but firm. And because eventually, you'll hear things, see things. I want you to understand the context before you draw conclusions. Are you a good man? The question hung between them like a held breath. No, he said finally, but I try to be better than I was. Honest. Brutally honest. Riley appreciated that more than any comforting lie. My mother loved you. She didn't know where the words came from, but they felt true. That's why she ran, isn't it? Because she loved you, and she was afraid of what that meant. Grayson's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he did, his voice was rough. She loved me enough to leave. That's more than I deserved. Do you still love her? Every day for 25 years. He looked at Riley then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her understand why her mother had run, and why she'd never looked back. That's my curse, Riley. I'm very good at holding on. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Riley set down her water glass and stood. I should go. I'll have a car take you home. I can take the train. It's past 1 a.m. Humor me. She was too tired to argue. They rode the elevator up in silence, through the empty restaurant, out into the cold December night where a black car waited. The driver opened the door without a word. Riley, Grayson said before she got in. Thank you. For tonight. For giving this a chance. I didn't have much choice. You always have a choice. You just made the hard one. He buttoned his coat against the wind. That takes courage. She thought about that on the drive home, watching Chicago blur past the tinted windows. Thought about her mother at 19, pregnant and terrified, making an impossible choice. Thought about herself at 24, stepping into a world she didn't understand because the alternative was watching her mother die. Maybe courage wasn't about being fearless. Maybe it was about being terrified and moving forward anyway. The apartment felt emptier than it had that morning. Riley showered, washing away the smell of expensive perfume and wine and secrets, then stood at the window looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Her mother slept in a hospital bed, getting stronger because Grace and Hale had decided her life was worth saving. And somewhere in the Gold Coast, Grayson sat in his office beneath a restaurant, holding on to a love that had died 25 years ago, refusing to let go. Riley understood then what her mother had tried to warn her about. Not that Grayson was dangerous in the way gangsters are dangerous, with guns and violence and blood. He was dangerous the way gravity is dangerous, subtle, inevitable, impossible to escape once you'd fallen too far. She was falling. She could feel it starting, that shift from fear to fascination, from gratitude to something warmer and more treacherous. She should quit, should walk away while she still could. But she thought about her mother's medical bills, now paid, about this apartment with its heat and its safety and its view, about the way Grayson had looked at her and said you belong here, like he could see something in her that she'd never seen in herself. Riley closed her eyes and made a choice. Not the safe one, not the smart one, the one that felt, for the first time in her life, like Hayes. She'd stay, she'd work, she'd learn his world, and she'd be careful not to fall any further. But even as she promised herself that, standing alone in her beautiful cage, Riley knew it was already too late. 3 weeks into the job, Riley received her first paycheck. $6,000, exactly as promised. She stared at the direct deposit notification on her phone for a full minute. Satan, there'd been a mistake. But when she called the payroll number Teresa had given her, a patient voice confirmed the amount and asked if there was anything else they could help with. Riley sat on her couch and cried for the second time since moving into the apartment. Not from sadness, from the staggering relief of not having to count quarters for the train, not having to choose between groceries and laundry, not having to lie awake calculating which bill could wait another week. For the first time in her adult life, she had breathing room. She paid off her credit card debt, all of it, sent her mother flowers, not grocery store carnations but real roses from a florist who delivered, bought herself a winter coat that wasn't held together with safety pins, and she worked 6 nights a week instead of 5 because Raymond needed help and Riley found she actually liked it, the rhythm of service, the satisfaction of making people feel welcomed, the small victories of handling difficult guests with grace. Grayson came in most nights, never with reservations, never staying long, but always watching from his corner table, his attention a weight Riley had learned to carry. They didn't speak much beyond pleasantries, but sometimes, when the restaurant was full and the energy was right, their eyes would meet across the room and something would pass between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding, the feeling that they were both playing roles they'd learned too well. Her mother was getting better. The transplant list had moved her higher thanks to Grayson's money and connections. She'd be out of the hospital soon, the doctors said. Just a few more weeks of monitoring. Riley visited every Sunday, bringing takeout from Meridian that Raymond insisted on packing up. Her mother would eat the expensive food with tears in her eyes, marveling at the flavors, asking about the restaurant, careful never to mention Grayson by name. They both knew he was there, though, present in every conversation like a ghost. "Are you happy?" her mother asked one Sunday in late December. Riley looked out the hospital window at Chicago under snow, the city transformed into something clean and beautiful and temporary. "I don't know. I'm not afraid anymore. That's something. Being unafraid isn't the same as being safe." "Maybe not, but it's enough for now." Her mother reached for Riley's hand. "Just promise me something. Promise that when the bill comes due, because it will, you'll remember you always have a choice." "Mom." "Promise me, Riley." "I promise." But the words felt hollow, because Riley was starting to realize that she'd already made her choice, had been making it every day since she walked into Grayson's world. Every shift she worked, every paycheck she cashed, every night she went home to an apartment he owned, they were all small yeses adding up to something she couldn't take back. On New Year's Eve, Meridian hosted a private event. 30 guests, champagne flowing, the city's elite celebrating in muted luxury. Riley worked the room with practiced ease, refilling glasses, ensuring everyone felt attended to. At 11:30, Grayson found her in the kitchen. "Take a break. Come upstairs." She followed him to the rooftop, a space she didn't know existed until that moment. The city spread below them, fireworks already starting in the distance, early countdowns from parties she could hear but not see. "You've done well," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "Better than I expected." "Low bar." He smiled. "Honest assessment." He looked out over the city. "I want to offer you something." Riley's pulse quickened. "What?" "A raise. 8,000 a month, and a management position overseeing 2 other properties I own." "That's too much." "It's what you're worth." "To you, maybe. But—" "Riley." He turned to face her fully. "Stop arguing with your own value. You're smart, capable, and you work harder than anyone I've hired in years. This isn't charity. It's recognition. Before we close this chapter, take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Every small gesture helps the next story find its way to you." The champagne was cold in her hand. Below, the city counted down. 10, 9, 8. Riley looked at Grayson and saw something she'd been trying not to see for weeks. Not danger, not manipulation. Loneliness. Here was a man who had everything money could buy, who commanded rooms with a glance, who'd spent 25 years holding on to a love that had left him behind. And he was alone on a rooftop on New Year's Eve, offering her promotions like they were bandages for wounds she couldn't see. 3, 2, 1. The city erupted. Fireworks bloomed across the skyline, brilliant and temporary. And Riley made another choice. She kissed him. Just once. Soft and brief, tasting of champagne and regret. Then she pulled back, her heart hammering. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize." His voice was rough. "Not for that. This is a mistake." "Probably." He set down his glass, his control fracturing for just a moment. "But I stopped making smart decisions where your family is concerned 25 years ago." They stood there while the fireworks faded, the city celebration continuing below, oblivious. Riley knew she should step away, should put distance between them before this became something neither of them could take back. But she didn't move, and neither did he. "Your mother would hate this," he said finally. "I know. She'd tell you to run." "I know that too." "Then why are you still here?" Riley looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the money and the power and the carefully controlled exterior. Saw someone who'd loved and lost and never recovered. Someone who gave and gave and gave because he didn't know any other way to hold on. "Because I think you're more than what people say about you," she said quietly. "And because I'm tired of running from things that scare me." He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away. When she didn't, he touched her face with a gentleness that broke something open in her chest. "I'm not a good man, Riley. You should understand that. You saved my mother's life. For selfish reasons. Does that make her less alive?" He had no answer for that. The fireworks had stopped. The city settled into the new year, and they stood on a rooftop between who they'd been and who they might become. "I don't want to hurt you," Grayson said. "Then don't." "It's not that simple." "It is, though." Riley covered his hand with hers. "You make it complicated because that's what you know. But it can be simple, if you let it." He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm in the cold air. "I've spent 25 years in love with a ghost. I don't know how to be anything else." "Then learn." They kissed again, longer this time, and it felt like falling and flying all at once. Riley knew she was crossing a line she couldn't uncross, stepping into territory that would change everything. But she was so tired of being careful, so tired of holding back. When they finally pulled apart, Grayson looked at her with something like wonder. "You're nothing like her, you know. Your mother. Is that a problem?" "No." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, more human. It's a gift I don't deserve. They went back downstairs as the party wound down. Raymond raised an eyebrow when he saw them together, but said nothing. The guests departed into the new year, and the staff cleaned up, and Riley worked beside them with her lips still tingling and her heart still racing. At 2 a.m., Grayson offered to drive her home. She accepted. They rode in silence through empty streets, Chicago asleep or celebrating in private. When they reached her building, he walked her to the door. $8,000 a month, he said. Starting next week. Think about it. I don't need more money. Then think about what you do need. He touched her face again, brief and careful. And Riley, your mother can never know about this. About us. There is no us. Not yet. But there will be. It wasn't a question. Riley nodded, unable to deny it. She watched his car pull away, then took the elevator up to her apartment, her chest tight with something that felt like joy and terror mixed together. She'd just kissed her mother's lost love, had just agreed to something that would devastate Catherine if she ever found out. But standing alone in her apartment with the city lights spread below like promise, Riley couldn't bring herself to regret it. She was falling, had been falling since the moment she'd mentioned that tattoo in a South Side diner. And now she was falling faster, the ground rushing up to meet her, and she couldn't tell anymore if she wanted to slow down or just let gravity have its way. The new year stretched ahead, full of possibility and danger. Riley closed her eyes and jumped. The affair, if you could call it that, unfolded in stolen moments between midnight and dawn. After the restaurant closed, Grayson would take her to the office below or to his penthouse at the Continental, and they would talk. Just talk, mostly, about Chicago winters and New York summers. About her childhood in a city that ate people alive and his childhood in a world where everything was decided before you were born. About books and music and the weight of other people's expectations. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. And somehow that made Riley want to give everything. They kissed often but slept together only once, in late January, after too much wine and too many admissions. It was tender and careful and nothing like Riley expected. Afterward, he held her like she might disappear if he let go, and she understood finally. Because loving Grayson Hale was like loving the ocean, beautiful and terrifying and capable of drowning you without even trying. Tell me about her, Riley said one night, lying in his bed with the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling. My mother. What was she like before? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, fearless. She'd argue with men twice her age about politics, literature, anything. She had this laugh that made you want to earn it. He turned to look at Riley. You have her eyes, but your courage is different. His came from anger. Yours comes from love. Is that better? It's kinda. The world could use more of that. The world could use more of that. Riley thought about those words often in the weeks that followed. Thought about them when she managed his restaurants with increasing confidence. Thought about them when she visited her mother, who was finally strong enough to be discharged, and lied about where she'd been spending her nights. Catherine moved into a rehab facility for post-transplant patients. Grayson paid for that too, of course. Riley visited 3 times a week, bringing food and magazines and careful conversation that never mentioned his name. But her mother knew. Riley could see it in the way Catherine watched her, the questions she didn't ask, the sadness that flickered across her face when Riley mentioned work running late or being too tired to stay long. You're different, Catherine said one afternoon in February. Happier, maybe, or something like it. Riley busied herself arranging flowers in a vase. The job is going well. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean. Riley. Mom. Please, don't. Silence filled the small room. Outside, snow fell over Chicago, covering everything in temporary forgiveness. I just want you to be safe, Catherine said finally. That's all I've ever wanted. I am safe. I promise. But the promise felt like ash in her mouth. Because she wasn't safe, not really. She was falling in love with a man who existed in shadows, who built empires on secrets, who'd spent 25 years unable to let go of her mother. And the worst part? Riley didn't want to be safe anymore. She wanted to be reckless, wanted to feel alive in a way she never had before. In March, everything changed. Riley was at Meridian, managing the dinner service, when two men in suits walked in. Federal agents. She realized immediately. FBI, maybe, or something worse. They asked for Grayson. "He's not here," Riley said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "When will he be back?" "I don't know. Would you like to make a reservation?" The older agent, gray hair, tired eyes, looked at her with something like pity. "Tell Mr. Hale that we need to speak with him. Soon." They left business cards. Riley pocketed them with shaking hands. When Grayson arrived an hour later, she pulled him into his office and showed him the cards. He studied them without expression, then set them on his desk. "What did they want?" Riley asked. "Information I don't have." "About what?" "Things that don't concern you." "Don't do that." Riley's voice sharpened. "Don't shut me out now. Not after everything." He looked at her, and for the first time since they'd started this thing between them, she saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. "They are investigations into some of my business partners, people I've worked with over the years. The feds think I can give them leverage." "Can you?" "Yes. But if I do, I'm dead within a week." The words hung in the air like smoke. Riley felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "You're serious?" "I'm always serious about survival." He pulled her close, his hand steady despite the dangers circling them both. "This is what I tried to protect you from. This is why your mother ran." "What are you going to do?" "What I've always done. Find a way through that doesn't get everyone killed." If this story has already found a place in your heart, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more stories that stay long after they end. That night, Riley couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about federal agents and business partners and the weight of secrets that could kill. Thinking about her mother, who'd known all of this at 19 and had chosen to run rather than drown in it. At 3 a.m., her phone rang. "Grayson, come to the Continental. Now." His voice carried an urgency that brought Riley instantly awake. She dressed quickly and took a car service downtown, her heart hammering the entire way. The penthouse was dark except for a single lamp. Grayson stood by the windows, looking out over the city with his hands in his pockets. When he turned, Riley saw something in his face that made her stop breathing. "I need you to do something for me," he said. "Something that might save both our lives." "What?" "Your mother. I need to talk to her. Tonight. It's 3 a.m. "I know, but this can't wait." Riley wanted to argue, wanted to protect her mother from whatever storm was coming. But she looked at Grayson's face and saw desperation there. Real, human desperation. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." They took his car to the rehab facility. Riley used her key to let them in, led him through quiet halls where people slept, unaware that in a penthouse room on the 3rd floor, lives were about to collide again after 25 years. Catherine was awake, sitting by the window in her nightgown. She turned when they entered, and the look that crossed her face when she saw Grayson, it was everything. Love and grief and fury all at once. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was cold. "I need your help." "I gave you everything I had to give. There's nothing left." "Catherine, please, just listen." Riley stood by the door, watching them. Her mother looked stronger now, but still fragile. Grayson looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether to jump or turn back. "The feds are investigating my connections," he said simply. "They want names. Information. If I give it to them, I'm dead. If I don't, I go to prison." "Then go to prison." Catherine's voice was flat. "Pay for your choices." "I've already paid. For 25 years, I've paid. But I won't let Riley pay too. Catherine's eyes snapped to her daughter. What is he talking about? Riley's throat tightened. Mom. You've been with him. It wasn't a question. Catherine stood, her hands shaking. You've been with him this whole time. That's why you're different. That's why you lie about where you are. I'm sorry. Sorry. Her mother's voice broke. I ran from this world to protect you. I gave up everything, my family, my name, my past, so you wouldn't have to live like this. And you walked right back into it. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. Catherine was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I taught you that. I showed you that. You also taught me that love means sacrifice. Riley's own tears came hot and fast. That sometimes you do things that scare you because the alternative is worse. This isn't love. It's a cage dressed up as freedom. Maybe, but it's my cage. My choice. The words hung in the room like judgment. Catherine looked between her daughter and the man she'd loved and left, and something in her seemed to break. What do you need? She asked Grayson quietly. Your brother. He's still connected, isn't he? To the families in New York. Catherine's face went pale. I haven't spoken to him in 25 years. But you could, if you had to. Why would I? Because he's the only one who can broker a deal that keeps me alive and out of prison. Because he owes you for disappearing without a word. Grayson moved closer. Because somewhere under all this anger, you still care what happens to me. And you love your daughter too much to let her watch me die. Catherine closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were clearer. Decided. If I do this, if I call in every favor I'm owed and burn every bridge I've spent 25 years building, you leave Riley alone. You pay her what you owe her and you let her go. No. Riley stepped forward. Mom, you can't. This is the deal. Catherine's voice was steel. Take it or leave it. Grayson looked at Riley. She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. But he turned back to Catherine and nodded once. Okay. No. Riley's voice cracked. You don't get to decide this. Either of you. Riley, her mother started. I'm not a child. I'm not some prize to be bargained over. I made my choice. I chose him. She looked at Grayson. I choose him. The room fell silent except for the hum of the heating system and the distant sound of someone coughing in another room. 3 people, bound together by choices made and unmade, by love that refused to die even when it should have. Make the call, Grayson said to Catherine. Please, I'll figure out the rest later. Catherine walked to the window, her back to them both. Get out. Both of you. I'll call my brother in the morning. But after this, we're done. All of us. Riley wanted to argue, wanted to fix this somehow. But Grayson took her hand and pulled her gently toward the door. In the car, she cried against his shoulder while Chicago blurred past, and he held her like she was made of something precious and breakable. She's wrong, Riley whispered. About us. About everything. Maybe. His voice was rough. Or maybe she's the only one who's right. Catherine made the call. Riley didn't know what her mother said, what favors she called in, what parts of her carefully buried past she had to resurrect. But 3 days after that night at the rehab facility, Grayson's lawyer informed him that a deal had been brokered. Testimony in exchange for immunity. Witness protection if he wanted it. A way out that didn't end with bullets or bars. He took it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and careful statements. Riley barely saw him. When she did, he looked hollowed out, like something essential had been carved away. The restaurants continued operating, but Grayson began transferring ownership, selling off properties, dismantling the empire he'd spent decades building. Raymond took over Meridian. Teresa moved to manage the security consulting firm under new leadership. And Riley kept working, kept going through the motions, while everything around her dissolved like sugar in water. Her mother refused her calls. On a cold evening in late March, Grayson came to her apartment. It was the first time he'd been there since they'd started whatever this was. He stood in her living room, looking out of place, too large for the space, carrying something heavy she couldn't name. "It's done," he said. "I testify next week. After that, I'm leaving Chicago." Riley had known this was coming, had prepared herself for it, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the chest. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knows my name." "Witness protection." "Just relocation. I have enough money hidden away to start over. Be someone else." "And me?" He looked at her then, and she saw everything he'd been holding back. The love, the regret, the understanding that this was always how it would end. "You stay here. You have your job, your apartment, your mother when she's ready to forgive you. You have a life, Riley, a real one, not the shadow I've been living in." "I don't want that life without you." "Yes, you do. You just don't know it yet." He moved closer. "I made a promise to your mother that I'd let you go, and I keep my promises." "What if I don't want to be let go?" "Then you're braver and more foolish than anyone I've ever known." He touched her face gently. "I love you, Riley. I've loved you since the night you mentioned that tattoo and looked at me like I was just a person, not a monster or a legend. But loving me will cost you everything. Your mother, your peace, maybe your life. People keep telling me what things will cost. No one asks what I'm willing to pay. Because the people who love you know the price is too high." Riley felt tears burn her eyes. "So that's it? You just leave?" "I leave so you can stay. There's a difference." He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and set it on her counter. "That's the deed to this apartment. It's yours, free and clear. And there's a trust. Enough money that you never have to worry about bills or your mother's care or anything else. You're set. For life." "I don't want your money." "I know. But you're getting it anyway." If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. They stood in her apartment while the city hummed below, and Riley felt her heart breaking in slow motion. This was what her mother had warned her about. This was the price. Not violence or danger, but loss. The kind that doesn't kill you but changes you forever. "When do you leave?" she asked. 2 days. "Can I see you before you go?" "No." His voice was firm. "Clean breaks heal better than slow tears." "That's cruel." "Yes, but it's kinder than the alternative." He kissed her once, long and deep and final. Then he walked to the door. Riley wanted to call him back, to beg him to stay, to promise she'd follow him anywhere. But the words stuck in her throat, and she let him go. The door closed. The lock clicked. And Riley Moore stood alone in an apartment she now owned, with money she didn't want, and a future that stretched ahead empty and safe. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the window and watched the street below until she saw him emerge, watched him get into a car that pulled away smoothly, watched it disappear into Chicago traffic like it had never been there at all. Then she cried, sat on her floor and cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen and the sun had set over the city that had promised her nothing and given her everything and taken it away again. The next morning, she went to see her mother. Catherine was back in her own apartment now, a modest place in a decent neighborhood that Grayson's money had made possible. She opened the door slowly when Riley knocked, her face carefully neutral. "Can I come in?" Catherine stepped aside. The apartment smelled like tea and old books. They sat at the kitchen table, the same way they'd sat in a dozen different kitchens throughout Riley's childhood, and the weight of everything unsaid hung between them like fog. "He's leaving," Riley said finally. "Day after tomorrow." "I know." "Did you ask him to?" "I asked him to let you go. What he did with that was his choice." Riley's hands clenched on the table. "You had no right." "I had every right. I'm your mother." I'm 24 years old. I'm not a child you can protect from every mistake. Loving him isn't a mistake. It's a tragedy. Catherine's voice broke. And I've lived that tragedy. I know how it ends. With you alone, damaged, unable to trust anyone because the one person you gave everything to couldn't stay. His staying away because of you. Because you made him promise. Yes, and I'd do it again. Her mother reached across the table, taking Riley's hands in hers. You think I don't understand what you're feeling? I loved him, Riley. Loved him so much it scared me. But I loved you more. And love means making choices that break your own heart to protect someone else's. Riley pulled her hands away. I don't want that kind of love. You don't get to choose. That's what being a mother means. They sat in silence, two women loving the same man for different reasons, both losing him in the end. I'm going to hate you for a while, Riley said quietly. For this. For taking away my choice. I know. I can live with that. Can you live with the fact that you might have saved me from him, but you also saved me from happiness? Catherine flinched. If your happiness requires sacrificing your safety, then yes, I can live with that. Riley stood. I need to go. Riley. No, not right now. I can't. I just can't. She left her mother sitting at that kitchen table and walked out into March air that smelled like rain and new beginnings. Walked until her feet hurt, until the city had swallowed her rage and grief and left her emptied out. That night, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was what growing up felt like, losing the things you love and learning to survive anyway. Grayson left Chicago on a Thursday. Riley didn't go to see him off. Didn't call. Didn't try to find him one last time. She simply let him go. Because maybe her mother was right. Maybe clean breaks did heal better. Or maybe they just hurt less in the moment. And the real pain came later, in the quiet hours when you realized what you'd lost. Either way, Riley woke up Friday morning in an apartment that was hers, with a job that was hers, with a life that was entirely hers. And she felt nothing but empty. 6 months passed like a season Riley couldn't name. She kept working at Meridian, though it was different now. Raymond managed everything, and Riley moved into a consulting role, overseeing operations at 2 other properties Grayson had transferred before leaving. The work was good. The pay was better than good. And slowly, reluctantly, Riley began to build something that felt like a life. Her mother healed. The transplant held. By summer, Catherine was strong enough to go back to work part-time, nursing at a clinic in Bridgeport. They saw each other weekly, their conversations careful at first, then gradually easier. The anger Riley had felt softened into something more manageable. Forgiveness, maybe. Or just exhaustion. They never talked about Grayson. But he was there anyway, present in every silence. Every moment Riley caught her mother looking at her with worry in her eyes. Present in the apartment Riley owned, in the money that gave her freedom, in the space inside her chest that felt hollow no matter how much she filled her days. She dated, briefly, a lawyer she met at Meridian, kind and uncomplicated and entirely safe. It lasted 3 weeks before Riley realized she was looking for shadows in his eyes that weren't there, waiting for danger that would never come. She ended it gently, went home alone, and accepted, finally, that some part of her had been irreversibly changed by those few months with Grayson Hale. In September, Riley's phone rang at 2 a.m. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Riley. His voice, low and careful. Don't hang up. Her heart stopped. Where are you? Far away, but I needed to hear your voice. You promised to stay away. I know. But I never promised not to love you. Riley sat up in bed, her hand shaking. You can't call me. You can't do this. I know that too, but 6 months away from you has taught me something. He paused. Some cages are built from the inside out, and I've been in one so long I forgot what freedom feels like. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to try again. Somewhere new. Somewhere we can both be free. Grayson, I'm not asking you to decide tonight, or even this year. I'm just asking you to know that the door is open, that I'm here, that if you ever want something more than safety, you know where to find me. Tears streamed down Riley's face. My mother. Your mother loves you. She'll understand, eventually, or she won't, but either way, you'll know you chose with your whole heart. Where are you? Montana. I bought a ranch. Middle of nowhere. I spend my days fixing fences and watching the sky. He laughed softly. Turns out I'm decent at being nobody. Riley closed her eyes, picturing it. Grayson in jeans and work boots, sun-weathered and free. A life so far from Chicago it might as well be another planet. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Then don't. Stay in Chicago. Live your life. Be happy. That's all I want for you. That's not all you want. No, but it's what you deserve. They stayed on the line in silence, connected across 1,000 miles of darkness. Riley could hear wind on his end, the kind of big sky wind that only exists where land meets heaven. I should let you go, he said finally. Yes, you should. Riley. Yeah. Thank you for seeing something worth saving in me. The line went dead. Riley sat in her apartment as dawn crept toward Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She thought about her mother, who'd spent 25 years running from the past. Thought about Grayson, who'd spent the same years unable to move forward. And she thought about herself, caught between them, trying to decide what freedom really meant. The answer came slowly, over weeks. Not in a flash of certainty but in small realizations. Like noticing that her apartment felt less like home and more like a waiting room. Like catching herself looking west during sunsets, wondering what the sky looked like in Montana. Like finally understanding that her mother's fear, however valid, didn't have to become her own. In November, Riley made her decision. She gave Raymond notice, transferred the properties to his name, paid off her mother's apartment so Catherine would never have to worry about rent. Then she sat down at that same kitchen table where they'd fought so many months ago and told her mother the truth. I'm leaving Chicago. Catherine set down her tea carefully. Where are you going? Montana. To see if something broken can be fixed. Riley. I know what you're going to say. That I'm making a mistake. That I'm throwing away everything you sacrificed for. That I'm choosing him over you. Riley reached across the table. But I'm not choosing him over you. I'm choosing myself. My life. My chance at something real. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. What if it doesn't work? What if you get there and realize it's all been a beautiful lie? Then I'll come home. And I'll start over. Again. Riley squeezed her mother's hands. But at least I'll know. At least I tried. Catherine was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, he called me. Last week. Riley's breath caught. What? Grayson. He called to tell me he'd asked you to come. To give me time to prepare. Her mother's voice cracked. And to thank me for giving him you, even if it was only for a little while. What did you say? I told him if he breaks your heart, I'll find him. No matter how far he runs. She smiled through her tears. But I also told him that you're the best thing either of us ever made. And that he should be grateful every day that you chose him. Riley stood and went to her mother, pulling her into a hug. They held each other while the Chicago autumn faded outside, two women who'd loved the same man in different ways, finally understanding that love doesn't always look like protection. Sometimes it looks like letting go. If stories like this linger in your heart long after they end, don't leave just yet. Like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below, and let the next story find you when the night grows quiet again. Riley left Chicago on a Tuesday in late November. She packed light, clothes, books, photographs of her and her mother throughout the years. Everything else she left behind. The apartment, The furniture, the person she'd been before. A man walked into a diner and changed her life with a tattoo and a secret. The drive to Montana took 3 days. Riley watched America unfold through her windshield. The flat expanse of the plains, the slow rise of mountains, the big sky that seemed to hold more stars than darkness. And with every mile, she felt something in her chest loosen. Fear, maybe, or just the weight of other people's expectations. The ranch was exactly as she'd imagined. Sprawling land under an enormous sky, a house that looked small against the landscape, horses in a corral catching the last light of day. Grayson stood on the porch, wet clothes and a face that had softened somehow. When he saw her car, he went still. Just stood there watching as she parked and got out, the wind pulling at her hair. They looked at each other across the distance. "You came," he said finally. "I came. Your mother gave me her blessing. Sort of." Riley walked toward him. "She also threatened to kill you if you hurt me." "Fair enough." She climbed the porch steps and stood in front of him. He was thinner, tanned, real in a way he'd never been in Chicago. Like the city had been a costume he'd finally taken off. "I don't know if this will work," Riley said. "I don't know if we can build something from all this wreckage." "Neither do I. But I want to try." "Then we'll try." He reached for her hand, his grip warm and solid. Together. They stood on that porch as the sun set over Montana, two people who'd found each other in a diner through coincidence or fate, who'd loved through secrets and betrayal and loss, who'd finally learned that freedom isn't about having no ties. It's about choosing which ones to keep. That night, Riley called her mother from the ranch's landline, told her about the house, the horses, the sky so big it made Chicago feel like a memory. "Are you happy?" Catherine asked. Riley looked out the window at stars scattered across darkness, at Grayson moving through the barn with a grace that came from honest work. "I'm learning how to be. That's all any of us can do." They talked a while longer, about nothing and everything. And when they hung up, Riley felt something she'd been missing for months finally settle into place. Peace. Not the absence of fear. Not the guarantee of happiness. Just the quiet knowledge that she'd made a choice with her whole heart, and whatever came next, she'd chosen it freely. Grayson came back to the house smelling like hay and wood smoke. They made dinner together in a kitchen that was too small but somehow perfect. Ate by the fire while wind rattled the windows and the Montana wilderness pressed close around them. Later, lying in bed, Riley turned to him. "Tell me something true." "Like what?" "Like what you were thinking when I walked into that diner and mentioned the tattoo." He was quiet, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "I thought, here's the ghost of the woman I loved, walking toward me 25 years too late. And then I thought, no, she's not a ghost. She's a second chance I don't deserve." "Do you still think you don't deserve it?" "Every day. But I'm learning to accept it anyway." Riley smiled in the darkness. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." "Promise." "Promise." Outside, the wind sang through the pines. The stars tined overhead, indifferent and eternal. And in a ranch house in the middle of nowhere, two people who'd found each other through tattoos and memory and a conversation in a late-night diner finally began to build something new. Not perfect, not without scars, but theirs. Entirely, completely, beautifully theirs. The past didn't die. It never does. But it became something they could live with. Her mother called weekly, her voice gradually warming from skeptical to accepting. The restaurants in Chicago thrived under Raymond's management. And sometimes, when the wind blew right, Riley swore she could smell the city she'd left behind, coffee and exhaust and possibility. But she didn't miss it. Not really. Because she'd found something better than possibility. She'd found certainty, the kind that comes from making a choice and living with it, from loving someone with full knowledge of their flaws, from building a life one honest day at a time. Winter came to Montana, covering everything in white silence. Riley learned to ride horses, to mend fences, to read weather in the sky. Grayson taught her about the land, and she taught him about forgiveness, the kind you give yourself when you finally stop running. They were happy. Not always. Not perfectly. But in the ways that mattered. And on a night in December, 1 year after Riley had walked into a diner and changed everything, she stood on the porch watching snow fall over Montana and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The fear. The love. The impossible choices. And she realized something that made her smile. Sometimes the cage you're afraid of is just a door you haven't opened yet. Sometimes the life you think you're losing is the one that was never really yours. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself fall, trusting that someone will be there to catch you, or that you'll learn to fly on the way down. Either way, you jump. And Riley Moore had finally learned to fly.